talk to us today with regard to curating digital art. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, and apologies to everybody because I've had a few different technical problems and I haven't actually been able to test that this works, so I hope that this works. And can everybody hear me in Zoom? Oh yeah, I'm actually muted, so that's through the microphone, so I need to mute that.
Mute, please, yes. Oh, sorry, you need to be muting Zoom. That's okay.
Oh, mute Zoom.
Yes.
Not mute my microphone.
No, no. Sorry, yeah, mute the yeah.
Mute that one there.
Yes. Oh, yes, you're. That's right. I think actually this is also okay.
Okay, so again, apologies everybody. I had a few technical problems and I haven't been able to test this properly, but hopefully this is going to work now. So I'm going to be talking about curating digital art with a specific focus on the Fission exhibition that I co-curated with Dr. Zhang Shaitao and Dr. Li Fei for the Guizhou Provincial Museum. And the full title is Fission, the New Wave of International Digital Art. I'm going to start off just by playing a sort of video overview, a promotional video to give you a sense of the exhibition. Let's hope this works. Sound's not working. Which is quite important because this is talking. Oh, there it is. Okay, I'll just so that gives you an overview. I'm just going to now my settings. The curatorial team. So I'm not sure I need to put this in. So I'll have to keep on muting it and unmuting it. Yep. Still echoing. Even though I've got it on mute.
What, just a second, yeah.
It's,
If you just shoot.
I have done. You've unmuted it. So yeah, it's muted. And it's muted there. Do you want to stop sharing computer sound?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, sorry about this, everybody. We didn't have a chance to test properly. So to introduce the curatorial team, there's myself. I'm an artist, curator and director of the Animation Research Centre at UCA. I specialise in expanded animation, in other words, exploring new paradigms for both the conceptualisation and application of animation and how this might be extended out into other disciplines. Dr. Zhang Shaitao is an important Chinese media artist who's represented China at the Venice Biennale, amongst many other biennales and prestigious exhibitions. He did his PhD with Xu Bin at the Central Academy of Fine Arts in Beijing. He originally started out in painting, but he now focuses on digital media, creating animated films and installations. He's also an inspirational mentor to young artists and a curator. I first met him through one of his students when I exhibited work at Sichuan Fine Arts Institute in Chongqing in 2016. We kept in touch since then, and he's included my work in a number of important exhibitions of media art in China. This is the first time that he's invited me to co-curate with him, so it's been a really great honor for me to be part of his team. Dr. Li Fei, the third curator, is the director of the Guizhou Provincial Museum. His background's in archaeology, so he had a particular interest in work that might combine the ancient and the modern. So I will now, have to put my computer sound back on. So you can hear Li Fei.
馆长李飞裂变数字艺术的全球化浪潮是由担任策展人，夏岩教授担任总策划，联合推出的一场重量级的数字艺术展。
Yep, sorry people in Zoom, there's an echo going, so I'm just going to have to hear it, but then it'll stop the echo.
Yeah, so you can just hold the mic to it.
大家好。
To the themes of the exhibition from Chief Curator Dr. Zhang Shaitao that he gave at the press conference. And he says quite a lot of things about the themes of the exhibition and themes. So
So go back to full screen. Back to share screen.
so it's not turning this microphone.
Back to your PowerPoint.
Yeah, I'm in the PowerPoint,
Oh,
but we're just getting this echo still.
turn off your sounds on the computer.
Okay. Right. So again, apologies about this. We didn't get a chance to test this out properly. So the central metaphor of the exhibition is the process of fission. Nuclear fission is a primarily unnatural human procedure driven by technology. In this case, the splitting of atoms is induced by bombarding the unstable nucleus of a uranium cell with neutrons, which excites it until it bursts, emitting non-identical particles and large amounts of energy. This is a form of transmutation, as the resulting fragments are not the same element as the parent atom. These fragments can trigger a chain reaction in nearby particles. Fission, the exhibition, compares this nuclear chain reaction with the proliferation of multiple forms of digital art. Just as bombarding a uranium cell with neutrons causes an explosion of different particles and the release of energy, digital art can be seen as an unstable concept that's exploded into many different forms since the invention of digital technology and reanimated art itself. As it takes so many different forms, in the 2020s, how can we even begin to conceptualize digital art? For me, the central idea was the explosion of different forms, but for Zhang Shaitao, he also made connections with traditional Buddhist thought. And Zhang Shaitao says, all things in the world are connected, including cell microbes, nuclear fission, and the supercomputing of digital information. The Buddhist Dharma advocates a world and wildlife and a Bodhi and a leaf, which can be applied to everything. We use 4 different categories to select the works and organize them thematically. Go through these different categories. The first one was quite interdisciplinary. This was especially led by Dr. Li Fei, who was interested in the rebirth of antiquities and reanimating ideas from traditional and ancient art through technologies. So an example of this can be seen in Korean artist Lili Nam's work. Lili Nam comes from a background in traditional art. He initially worked in sculpture, but then began to experiment with stop motion and then media arts more generally in order to overcome what he saw the limits of time and space in the materials he was using. Fascinated by the authority of traditional masterpieces of Western and Korean art, he began to intervene in these images and disrupt them with added animations such as ants, fish, water, and floating petals. His intention was to pull the flat painting into 3 dimensions, to make it more sculptural and to introduce time into the static frame. In this work here, Reborn Lights Songhamang Falls from 2019, a traditional watercolor pastoral scene, which is painted in ink, so the original painting is The Fall of Songhamang by Kang Eo. And this painting becomes slowly disrupted by images of war, bullets and bombs that usher in not physical destruction, but icons of Western art and culture, from classical Greek sculptures to Jeff Koons' balloon dog. Led by the ghost of Magritte, the images cycle through past, present, and future, and ultimately return to the pastoral setting and birdsong of the original image. This hints at not only this kind of Buddhist idea of impermanence, but also the opposition between culture and nature, and also between Western and Korean ideas about art. So that's Lili Nam. The next category, afterlife images, could perhaps have been better translated as post-human, and this category featured a number of robotic and biological artworks. The one I'm going to show you is created by two female artists, Sun Xiaoyi and Xi Weiyang, and this thought-provoking work, Dear, Please Play Me, involves the user wearing a suit made of musical instruments. However, in order to play music, the equipment must be beaten by someone. The artists intend this work as a comment on domestic violence. In their statement, they say, make an instrument that's violently vocalized, collect the musical tones and arrange them into a piece of music and record the vocalization process. I make a wearable instrument for you. The sound of the instrument comes from external beatings, strong shaking, and the shouting of the wearer. I collect and arrange the sounds, make a piece of music and play it for you. Weaving a piece of music out of violence is a very absurd and unacceptable act. But if you listen carefully to this piece, you must have heard it, and it rings in your ears. It appears in your house, your friend's house, your relative's house, your neighbor's house. In the midst of domestic violence, countless people are wearing this device and being played at any time, and this piece of music is never stopped. Is this not even more absurd? So that's a kind of a robotic music piece for a wearer. The next category, synthetic worlds, were a number of works that played with different notions of virtual reality and the combination of the illusory and lived experience. In this category, I show my own installation, Holes, which is one of a series of projects that I've made that seek to experiment with different methodologies for expanding animation out of the screen and into the three-dimensional space of the gallery in order to animate the viewer. It was inspired by a study of pre-cinematic devices such as peep shows, in which virtual worlds are created through simple analog materials by playing with perspective. In Holes, a spatial experience of looking through a portal into an imagined world is created by peeping at an animation through a series of holes of decreasing size. The interior space created by the animation hints at the inside of the human body. The film was made during the COVID pandemic, when touch and bodily contact could lead to infection and the nose or the mouth could become the entry point for the virus. Under these isolated conditions of lockdown, when the future was momentarily cancelled and time stood still, the project mutated into a mediation on absence, touch, and fear of contagion. The fourth and final category, algorithmic images, basically look to examine a number of different approaches to digital materiality. This is the work of Peter Burr. Peter Burr references the aesthetics of contemporary video game culture with a distinctive 8-bit style and restricted color palette. This work here in the image, The Continuous Monument from 2021, is a complex large-scale animation in which the whole screen is alive. Reminiscent of skyscrapers and architectural diagrams, abstracted landscapes continually scroll across the screen to be at first constructed and then collapse like an endlessly mutated labyrinth. Oversized, disassembled body parts inhabit the space alongside miniature tourists who mingle, stare, and idle. The title pays homage to a 1969 artwork by the experimental architecture group Superstudio. Their anti-architectural proposals used grid systems as a way to mediate space, often critiquing the dehumanizing tendencies of urban planning in the modern age. The artwork is generated from a collection of algorithmic systems, including crowd simulation, building assembly, and music generation. So we had an impressive and inspiring collection of artworks. But for me, bringing together this range of artists and calling it the new wave of international digital art raised a real problematic of linking together very different artworks with very different approaches and thought processes through their common usage of a particular medium. As part of my research, I looked back at the cybernetic serendipity exhibition at the ICA and reflected on how celebratory it was of technology, and I wanted to have a more critical edge in our exhibition. In my curatorial essay, I used a rereading of media theorist Wilhelm Flusser to connect a selection of the works and to provide a more critical perspective on technology. I'm particularly interested in Flusser's concept of the technical image and how an uncritical use of technology results in work that continues the ideological biases and automatisms that have been hardwired into the equipment. As Flusser explains, simply speaking, the technical image is in fact a visualized concept. A camera, as well as a photograph, are the result of a complicated scientific institution. A computer, a monitor, a display, etc. are the results of very complicated instruction conveyed by scientific concepts. He continues, around these transmission points sit functionaries who press the keys of apparatuses, especially those that compute images. For these images model the behavior, perception, and experience of all other functionaries. The functionaries instruct the images and how the images should instruct the receivers. The apparatuses instruct the functionaries, how they are to instruct the images, and other apparatuses instruct these apparatuses about how the functionaries are to instruct. So for this reason, I chose a number of artists whose work critiques the technology that they use. Petra Zeman, her work is concerned with a critique of popular culture, gaming, and the narrative structures that underpin our lives. They describe themselves as part of a generation that grew up learning how to perform themselves online. To be playing online games, using the internet and a smartphone is to be at once consuming and yet also to be continually making films, with every life event framed on camera and represented on social media. It is to be saturated with narratives to the extent that it's hard to distinguish what your own narrative is. It is also to be simultaneously inhabiting a number of different realities on and off screen, adopting different roles, playing different characters. Zeman's 4-part series of essay films, Monomyth Gaiden, oscillate between fantasy and reality. The title refers to two structures of narrative. The first is the Western monomyth, or the hero's journey, which is loosely premised around 3 stages of departure, initiation, and return. And the second structure is Gaiden, which is a Japanese plot device in which a secondary story or extra information about one of the characters is presented. In the series, Zeman is at once themselves on a fan visit to anime cultural sites in Japan, and also an anime character called Yourself. Included in Fission is the first part of the series, which starts with the artist's voiceover stating, "I am both myself and a character that looks like me." The film reflects on the creation of the character Yourself, who is an avatar that cross-affects one's real self, a character that's aware of narrative traditions and can subvert them. Zeman's films cannily investigate the multiple layers of existence that we inhabit in between virtual and physical worlds. With her unique, ugly, visual language and nightmarish visions, Wednesday Kim critiques the conventional use of CGI. Kim misuses the software, creating distorted and misshapen characters, leaving behind elements of the interface and parts of wireframes. In doing this, she reveals the magic tricks behind CGI that usually remain hidden, and thus demonstrates how virtual worlds are all carefully constructed illusions. Her films contain layers of surreal images, manipulated video and text, and like the work of Zeman, can be seen as a comment on the absurdity of our information-saturated contemporary life. Her surreal imagery comes from her subconscious. Nightmares, intrusive thoughts, traumas, wordplay, Wikipedia, voyeurism, and witticism all entwined. Sleep-Deprived Workers is a series of 4 short films that deal with the once taboo subject of the trauma of childbirth. Kim won a Procreate Mother Art Prize residency in 2019, where she developed the project. This initiative creates a space for artists to consider their own relationship to maternity. Kim built on her own experiences and collaborations with some of the other artists she met. The anxieties she felt about giving birth are adeptly channeled into the frenetic, multi-layered films. Next artist, Dirk de Bruijn. Critiquing the technical image as defined by Flusser and resisting its illusory potential is a particular concern of Dirk de Bruijn, Australian artist. Like Kim's, his images are full of interference. They flicker and stutter in rhythm. They are intentionally imperfect and lacking in the slickness of the photoreal digital image to assert their status as construction or fake rather than illusion or pretending to be real. De Bruijn has a long-standing background in experimental and expanded cinema and had amassed a lifetime of materials. Originally working on 16mm celluloid film, he began to work digitally when film processing facilities were shut down in Australia. Death of Place started when he moved his collection of film materials to a new purpose-built studio. For this film, he used digital technology to reanimate his archive, which included animation on film, home movies, and vintage found footage from the Russian Revolution, the utterings of Marshall McLuhan and Wilhelm Flusser. As he reworked the footage, he began to experience it in terms of Flusser's technical image, dislocated from their origin and mere products of technology. He explains that the title of his film came about because the digital seemed to remove the material experience of being in a place. With the film, he wanted to relocate a sense of film as a material and the context within which it's made. As de Bruijn's investigation is not just with the content of the image, but with how it's constructed, whole film strips are seen on screen rather than single images. Words related and unrelated to the image are displayed and spoken by the soundtrack, thus breaking our seduction by the visuals. So Flusser's particular critique of the technical image is that the origins of the image, its authority and validity remain problematic and hidden. Circulating virally and redistributed online, we no longer know where the image originated, yet these deceptive constructs are everywhere and can alter our reality. As Flusser said, the technical images currently all around us are in the process of magically restructuring our reality and turning it into a global image scenario. Essentially, this is a question of amnesia. Human beings forget they created the images in order to orientate themselves in the world. Since they are no longer able to decode them, their lives become a function of their own images. Imagination has turned into hallucination. In awe of the technical processes used to make them, we're deceived into thinking these images are close to reality or the natural world, but they actually reflect the logic of the technology used to make them, and the technology reflects the social, ideological, and cultural concerns of developers. It's been argued that inequality is hardwired into the very code of the technologies that we use, and due to the language and the assumptions programmed into them by the people who created them. This has been demonstrated by recent cases, such as how the manufacturers claimed it was simply a bug in the automatic tagging process in Google Photos that led to photos of Black people being tagged as gorillas. Indeed, the Algorithmic Justice League have launched a campaign against default computer vision libraries, which do not recognize faces with darker skin tones. In order to resist inadvertently perpetrating this, there needs to be a critical use of technology, a way to break away from how it was supposed to be used and to find new uses for it, a way to incorporate alternative knowledge systems and perspectives. So I'll just give two final examples of artists who I think are doing that. French artist Mathilde Leven has been involved in a number of experimental research projects combining art, science and technology, and works with different kinds of technologies for image making. The starting point for Tropics was an investigation of the Western fantasy of a new world and lush tropical paradise in Mexico. In the 19th century, a community of French people settled in Xicaltepec in the Veracruz region of Mexico. These French settlers were mainly farmers who established large farms. When Lavenne visited the region to meet and interview their descendants, she discovered that during the rainy season, many ancient pre-Columbian artifacts from previous inhabitants of the land emerged from the mud after flooding. So they just kind of came up. They were like memories or ghosts appearing from another time. The film itself deals with memory and how the past haunts the present. To create Tropics, Lavenne did not use a camera. She used a Faro 3D scanner that's supposed to be used in architecture to capture buildings. Following various routes, she installed the device and rendered a three-dimensional landscape. The misuse of the Faro 3D scanner results in ethereal scenes which retain an indexical link to reality and yet are forms of point clouds rather than photographic images. This gives the impression that she's penetrating deep beneath the surface of photographic reality into a kind of 3D archaeology that can expose the ghosts of colonialism. So final artist, Liliana Conles Gallegos. Being a transfronteriza inhabitant of the borderlands between Mexico and America, constantly crossing between countries, between languages, between being a citizen and being a colonial subject, Liliana Conles Gallegos draws upon the mestiza energy of being in between systems to confront the colonialism of the USA. For Gallegos, transborder consciousness or consciousness beyond coloniality equips the individual with defiant and dissident forms of negotiation that allow them to operate as a virus would within the matrix of colonial power. In the Coil Salki Imperative 2020, she explores these ideas through her use of virtual reality. Like going through layers of time in an archaeological excavation, this short immersive film made for VR conjures up layers of voices from the distant past who continue to haunt the present. The work reanimates the myth of the beautiful Coil Soyalki, murdered by her own son, and the myth is re-remembered from a female-centered decolonial perspective. Although Gallegos considers the software she uses to have coloniality coded into it, she tries to use it to confront that coloniality by expressing her own perspective. Images from her own paintings and drawings are collaged with extracts from Mexican murals and images from ancient pre-Columbian texts called codices. Tilt Brush enables her to explore a mestiza aesthetic in virtual space. For Gallegos, this was an emotional experience as she mourned the losses experienced by generations of women of color due to the violence and oppression of colonialism. The soundtrack uses multiple languages, English, Spanish, and Nahuatl, to convey a feeling of estrangement in which the viewer is made to feel like a foreigner and thus gain an insight into how it feels to be marginalized. So in conclusion, in creating an exhibition that promotes itself as being digital art, the medium determines our discourse. However, to return to the metaphor of nuclear fission, digital art is not fixed and essential, but an unstable category that is likely to explode into many new directions the moment we think we can define it. There are so many different approaches to using the technology, different agendas for using it, and different perspectives represented that it's become such a general term as to become almost meaningless. In addition, digital technology is now used at some stage in the creation and or dissemination of all artworks. So could we say that all artworks are now digital art? Finally, this was an important exhibition. This is opening day. We had 1,500 visitors on the first day, and we're currently in discussion with a number of other museums about transferring it there to different regions in China. It's undeniable that digital technology has engendered a multiplication of useful forms and an outpouring of creative energy. But to return to the metaphor of nuclear fission, it's important to remember that it comes with a downside, and to oppose just a purely celebratory approach to technology. This is not just Flusser's critique of the amnesiac technical image, which has lost its contextual anchor, but also to think about the ethics behind the use of our tools. Just as an unwanted byproduct of the generation of nuclear energy is radioactive waste, our reliance on digital technology also comes with byproducts. An estrangement from nature and authentic human contact, but also polluting waste materials, overuse of energy, and the depletion of precious minerals and energy resources. So I want to finish there. Apologies for all my technical problems. Thank you very much for inviting me here, to the organisers. This is my contact details. Please email me, or if anyone uses WeChat, you can contact me there if you want to ask a question, and if you want to know more about my work, please follow me on Instagram. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Birgitta. Well, firstly, thank you so much for presenting. I think it's an excellent insight into this important show, and I was intrigued actually by your references back not just to Flusser but also to cybernetic serendipity. Have you come across Gustav Metzger's critique of cybernetic serendipity, the
that's what I
automata in
read.
history? Yeah.
That was the one that I read.
Yes, touches on that military-industrial sort of aspect to it all at an early stage. I think he was very much, on
Because
that.
obviously part of the funding that we got from the show was around kind of economic generation, and let's showcase the latest toys and tools, and obviously if you want to get funding for a big show, you've got to play into these agendas around business and economics, but I did want to keep a critical edge in it.
Yes, and I think most important, and also it sort of brought back the original chap who invented the pixel. Basically, his description of firstly just this very basic sort of grid that he came up with, and later in his life, he went to, I think, Ravenna and saw how the mosaicists had actually done, treated that sort of early pixelation of images, and realized there were many other ways that he could have broken down that thing, but he insisted initially on a sort of very strict grid system that obviously has resulted in all of our screen technologies today. And I think that's an important early sort of realization that the way he'd done it was just the most basic sort of breakdown of the image. The other thing too, you said it's going to presumably travel to other regions in China. What's the likelihood of this also coming to Europe or America or some other venues?
I think at the moment the funding that we're getting is internally in China, so we'd need to get a lot of funding from somewhere else, because it's a massive exhibition, 2,200 square meters. We need a lot of money to bring it here.
But still, I think
got
it's
some cash.
Well, I think it might be an interesting project simply because it's such a good cross section of people who are currently active. And I think many that's obviously certainly new to me, and I've not been in the field a while, I think it'd be very good to bring those to further attention, and perhaps there could be ways to make that happen. I think it's an important point.
Very exciting to me to learn about Chinese media artists, and over the last few years I've been enormously excited by the media artworks that are happening in China, the massive spaces they have available to them, the university support, and for me it's amazing because people just kind of went straight into what they often still call it new media art, but just fascinating.
And I think an important point as well, this term digital art doesn't really serve what this is. I mean, I think it's so broad as to be indeed almost meaningless, that we need to find a new descriptor, a new way of sort of describing it's the processes, and the thought process behind this, and that tool, the fact that tools are not neutral, as you rightly say, that we invert the section. Some questions.
This was really fantastic. One thing I would say is curating to me is the key word, because in universities now they're idolizing technology in a way that almost subsumes the whole meaning of art as communication, emotion, stories, and the technology takes over, and you see a downgrading of humanities, art, per se, in humanities at universities. And setting aside the curating and the whole meeting and so, so this was, I think, really outstanding in how you brought that out at the meeting of that, and hopefully we'll see some changes in that. So thank you.
Well, thank you. I'm just really keen to highlight, as I said, the ecological implications of computing and the human implications of an over-reliance on screen-based technology. And another reason that I really like working with these Chinese artists is just, you know, a different theoretical perspective from the one in the West, and it's often quite informed with Buddhism. So Buddhism meeting technology and thinking about, you know, ecology. So it's fascinating for me.
Yes, I think that concept itself could be expanded upon. I think it'd be interesting to see. Oh,
Fantastic presentation. Very interested in your earholes work, and two parts to the question. So, did you look at Duchamp's one of his last pieces where he created a whole world behind a sort of a peep show?
I've seen that actually.
Yeah,
I've seen a whole load of peep shows from different artists.
Yeah,
I
I was
don't
checking
see
him out.
Duchamp.
That was just that nobody knew who was building it, and it was quite an elaborate peep show. But yeah, just what was the feedback from that piece? Audience feedback.
I haven't had any feedback from China, but I did it as a solo show in Vienna, and I got really good feedback from that. And I think they told me there was at least 300 engaged visitors every day. So we had really good feedback from that. And I'm now I'm sending it out as a standalone film without the peep show to different festivals.
Great.
So it's been to Slovakia and Zagreb, and yeah, maybe going to Sydney. It's going to be in Chicago. So it's sort of the film is touring around at the moment, independently of the installation, although I'm also trying to get the installation shown in London.
Oh, brilliant.
question.
Thanks. I know you made reference to the cybernetic serendipity exhibition, which was interesting. And I was thinking that, I mean, that was an extraordinary event. By the way, when I mention it, Nick, I always make the point that I actually went to it. But there we are. And really, it hasn't been followed up by too many exhibitions that have had the same ambition. And I was thinking about what you've been describing here. It looked as if it might have had an ambition which was slightly in line with that very much earlier exhibition. And I'm wondering if that's true. I'm not saying it's true. Does it indicate a different approach to digital exhibitions in China that we have not adopted as yet in the West?
I mean, Zhang Shaitao wanted to have a kind of snapshot of different technologies and approaches. So that was part of his mission with this exhibition. It's impossible to cover everything. So that's why he picked the 4 themes that we were looking for work under. I have been to quite a few absolutely massive media art exhibitions in China. I don't know if any has been as big as this before. Possibly, I think they probably have been, but I haven't been in them. But yeah, they have absolutely like entire factories, empty factories, filled with screens and installations and just amazing stuff. It's been so inspiring for me. Just incredible.
Okay, any further questions? Oh, thank you very much, Birgitta. And,
Thank you.
Yeah, we move Zoom and then we'll disconnect.